Anthony Albanese not ruling out double dissolution election amid housing bill standoff with Greens. Anthony Albanese says he doesn't anticipate Australians will go to the polls this year but is not ruling out an eventual double dissolution election if the standoff over a key housing bill isn't resolved. The Prime Minister has set up a double dissolution trigger with an announcement to reintroduce the Housing Australia Future Fund, HAF, legislation into the Parliament next week, with a vote in the lower house in October, after it failed to pass the Senate in June. The coalition ruled out its support for the bill from the outset, leaving the government to negotiate with the Greens and crossbench in the Senate. After lengthy negotiations, crossbenchers including the Jackie Lambie Network and David Pocock have agreed to the legislation, but the Greens have withheld their support, saying more needs to be done on renters' rights. During a press conference in the Greens-held seat of Brisbane, Albanese at first said he did not anticipate an election before the end of this year. Later, when asked to rule out a double dissolution election altogether, he said one would not be called this year, but did not rule out taking up the option of an election early next year. "Well, they won't be going to the polls this year, but we're determined to get this legislation passed. We want it to be passed," he said. "I can't be more serious." Albanese said the government had a clear mandate for the housing fund, as it was an election commitment, and said the way to ensure this doesn't provide a trigger is to pass the legislation. "We don't want to play politics with this," he said, accusing the Greens of continuing to oppose the legislation as a political ploy. Albanese also called on the coalition to embrace the opportunity to make a positive difference. Albanese accused the coalition of taking a leaf from the Tony Abbott playbook and saying no to everything. "This is a sensible reform that has the support of the housing industry, has the support of the building sector, has the support of community and social housing providers, has the support of ACOS and the welfare sector," he said. "They should support this legislation as well. This, in my mind, is less controversial than anything else we have done in this parliament." The acting leader of the opposition, Susan Ley, earlier said, threatening the Australian people with an early election because Labor's policies don't stack up is the height of arrogance from Anthony Albanese.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
The government first attempted to pass the bill through the Senate before the winter break but were stymied by the Greens and coalition. The Greens wanted to allow time for National Cabinet to progress reforms to strengthen renters' rights. By reintroducing the legislation in the House, Albanese is setting up the potential for the bill to fail for a second time in the Senate, which is the trigger required before a government can ask the Governor-General to dissolve both houses of the Parliament and call a snap election. Under the Constitution, a Prime Minister can ask for a double dissolution if a piece of government legislation fails to pass the Parliament twice, 3 months apart. Albanese has said he will have a parliamentary vote on the bill in October, which would meet the 3-month threshold. The HAF legislation sets up a $10 billion future fund to invest and pay out earnings of at least $500 million a year to invest in social and affordable housing. In a last-ditch attempt to get the legislation over the line before the winter break, the government also announced a $2 billion direct social housing investment, which has begun flowing through to the states and territories. In April, the Albanese government asked National Cabinet and housing ministers to examine renters' rights, which the Greens hope could develop into a rent freeze or an Australian Capital Territory-style rent cap. But Labor has so far refused the Greens' calls to set up a fund of at least $1 billion to incentivize states and territories to institute a rent freeze for 2 years.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
PM Modi meets Foxconn chief days after Taiwanese firm breaks from $20 billion JV with Vedanta. Foxconn chief Young Lu met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Gujarat's Gandhinagar on Friday, where both attended Semicon India 2023 conference. The meeting comes days after the Taiwanese company withdrew from a $20 billion joint venture, Vedanta Foxconn Semiconductors Limited, that would have brought the first chip manufacturing plant in India. The tech giant, however, said that it is planning to apply separately to build a semiconductor manufacturing plant in the country. Sharing the picture of the meeting between the Foxconn chairperson and PM Modi, the Prime Minister's office tweeted that the PM welcomed Foxconn's plans to expand semiconductor and chip manufacturing capacity in India. The tech firm said that it is optimistic about the country's Make in India semiconductor vision. Absolute privilege and delight to see PM Narendra Modi. Han High Technology Group, Foxconn, optimistic about Make in India semiconductor vision. Together, India and Taiwan are it. Diligent, persevering buffalo spirit is here. Always your most trusted, reliable partner, it tweeted. With a focus on attracting investments in India's nascent semiconductor ecosystem, the three-day Semicon India 2023 conference kicked off in Gujarat's capital city on Friday in the presence of PM Narendra Modi. The conference, which has the theme of the conference is Catalyzing India's Semiconductor Ecosystem, is its second edition, organized by India Semiconductor Mission in partnership with industry and industry associations, is aimed to make India a global hub for semiconductor design, manufacturing, and technology development. Addressing the conference, PM Modi said technology firms will be given 50% financial assistance for setting up semiconductor manufacturing facilities in the country. His government has rolled out the red carpet for chip makers, he said. Micron's Sanjay Mehrotra meets PM Modi. On the sidelines of this event, PM Modi also met Sanjay Mehrotra, President and CEO of semiconductor player Micron Technology. Micron has selected Gujarat's Sanand Industrial Park, Gujarat Industrial Development Corporation, GIDC, for a new assembly and test facility and is expected to begin in 2023.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
Mitch McConnell, Joe Biden lapses highlight advanced age of U.S. leaders. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell's unexplained freeze-up while speaking in Congress this week is the latest reminder that America's most powerful political leaders are much older than many in other democracies. Joe Biden, 80, is the oldest U.S. president to ever serve in the White House, and nearly 2 decades older than the median age of the world's national leaders, 62, Pew Research found. While Biden is younger than 89-year-old President Paul Biya of Cameroon, the world's oldest head of state, he could be a grandfather to Chilean President Gabriel Boric or Sanna Marin, who stepped down as Finland's prime minister last month. Both are 37. Yet Biden is years younger than some members of the U.S. Congress. McConnell, 81, stopped talking mid-sentence at a news conference on Capitol Hill on Wednesday and stood mutely for 23 seconds until he was led away from reporters, only to return later to report, "I'm fine." The moment sparked worries about his mental fitness, especially after he was hospitalized and treated for a concussion after a fall in March. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, 89, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, 89, and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, 81, are older than McConnell. Many congressional lawmakers are in their 70s, and the median age of the Senate is 65.3, 538 calculated, the oldest ever, versus a median age of 38.8 years in the United States as a whole. At 64, the U.S. Senate has the 7th highest average age of any parliamentary body, the Interparliamentary Union calculates, topping countries with much older populations including Japan, Italy, and Greece. Biden's advanced age has raised questions about whether he should stand for a second term. The president recently tripped over a sandbag on stage, walks with a careful gait and is prone to verbal slip ups. He may face Donald Trump, 77, as the Republican nominee in the 2024 election. Reuters polling shows many Americans think neither should run because of their age. Asked about Biden's age, the White House points to accomplishments, including the 2020 presidential election, India an indispensable partner for free and open Indo-Pacific, Japan. India is an indispensable partner to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific and Tokyo would like to further expand cooperation in the region with New Delhi, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi said on Friday. In an address at the India-Japan Forum, the visiting minister also referred to an assertion by the leaders of the G7 countries in the grouping's Hiroshima summit in May that any attempts to change the status quo by force cannot be tolerated anywhere. Hayashi said Japan is very keen to work hand in hand with India to make its G20 presidency successful, especially the upcoming summit of the Intergovernmental Forum. The Japanese foreign minister said a call for upholding international law may sound like a mere slogan unless the challenges being faced by the global south are dealt with effectively. In his comments, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar described Japan as India's natural partner. Hayashi arrived in Delhi on Thursday on a two-day visit.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
Helping Democrats stave off losses in the 2022 elections and getting a host of legislation through Congress as president. Biden doesn't make the top 10 of the world's oldest currently serving leaders, according to Pew, which in addition to Baya is led by Mahmoud Abbas, president of the Palestinian Authority, at age 87.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
Election 2023, who will pay to tackle the cost of living crisis? Who should pay more to tackle the cost of living crisis has fired up the cross-party shots as a smorgasbord of tax policies have been released, including National pre-announcing Labour's purported plans to scrap GST on fruits and vegetables, and a radical tax bracket shake-up planned by Te Patti Maori. National Party Deputy Leader Nicola Willis told Morning Report she stands by her release of a move she claimed would be Labour's central tax card for the coming election, and says revealing it was in the public's interest. I think people will be interested to know, and I'm confident on the facts of this matter. She would not be disclosing her sources, she said. National believes reduced GST on fruit and vegetables would be misguided as it would be unwieldy and difficult to introduce, and would benefit supermarkets and the well-off who buy more costly grocery items more than those who were struggling most. The idea of cutting GST from fruit and vegetables rears its head every election, and is generally well supported by voters. Shoppers 24newsread.blogspot.com spoke to This Week strongly supported the idea. Labour Party leader Chris Hipkins has not denied Labour was looking at GST on fresh produce, but said he was not going to be announcing tax policy yet, and asked why Willis was focused on his party's policies instead of making her own promises add up. Willis said this morning that Labour needs to get its own house in order and control government spending and inflation. In the past year alone, fruit and vegetables have gone up 22%. Removing GST would only take us back to the prices they were 9 months ago. What we really need to do is solve the underlying drivers of rampant price inflation. That's what's catching New Zealanders out, it's groceries, it's rents, it's prices across the board, Willis said. You've got to get at the underlying drivers of inflation, you've got to get government spending under control, you've got to stop passing costs on to farmers and food producers that end up being paid for people at the supermarket, you've got to make sure that you're taxing fairly. Our priority is personal income tax reduction by adjusting tax thresholds, and that's because we know if we adjust tax that way, every single dollar will end up in the bank account of the person we're targeting it at. Asked where National's tax plan and costings were, she said it was traditional to announce them closer to the election.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
We've made clear that the difference between us and Labour is that we're prepared to look at some of the wasteful spending, inefficient spending, and unproductive spending that the government is doing itself, because by reining that in we can ensure that New Zealanders can keep more of their own money. ACT Party Deputy Leader Brooke Van Velden told 24newsread.blogspot.com that while removing GST from fruit and vegetables sounded attractive, it was a red herring when it came to tackling the cost of living. We already know from looking at the Tax Working Group's report, they've acknowledged that this will help people who can afford things like fresh blueberries, fresh raspberries, but it's not giving a huge benefit for someone who's already counting the coins for half a cut of fresh pumpkin. It's much better for us to look at how we can reduce costs to families, rather than trying to put so much more compliance and administrative burden on those small grocery groups that will now have double the amount of time looking at how they figure out what's GST exempt on their store floors and you not getting actually much benefit for those that truly do need it. Patty Mowry this week announced a shake-up of tax policies that would put a heavier tax burden on the wealthy and overseas interests, and which they say could raise the take-home pay of 98% of people and make earnings up to $30,000 tax-free. They plan to introduce a vacant house tax and land banking tax, a wealth tax, put $500 million into investigating New Zealand's estimated $7 billion of tax evasion, and remove GST from all kind. Patty Mowry co-leader Debbie Enger-Packer told Morning Report this would invigorate the economy by pouring money back into it and prioritize fixing poverty, hunger, and homelessness. The multiplier effect of the average New Zealander being able to go out and afford to pay for better housing, for electricity, is actually going to bring more money into the economy, Enger-Packer said. We have to look at the fact that we have 2% of the nation owning 50% of the wealth. Disrupting that is not going to collapse this nation, it's going to bring another $16.4 billion back into the economy. What we're dealing with is the noise from politicians who would prefer that the rich keep paying 9.4% of their wealth as tax, and the average New Zealanders paying 20.2%. We've got to stop pretending that there is no poverty in this country. Addressing increasing wealth disparity would mean socio-economic problems could be tackled at the root and make a real difference to issues like homelessness and crime, she said. We've got politicians on the right saying we need to stop ram raiding, we need to spend billions and millions to stop this, but they don't want to put more into SFO Serious Fraud Office to chase up the $7 billion of tax evasion that we have as a nation. So we've got to stop the whistle blowing, the fearing and telling everyone that the country's going to go backwards. We're threatening a system that's been designed for corporates and designed for duopolies, for example, to thrive off. Those overseas investors that need ghost houses are going to be affected. Well, actually, yes they are, because we have 190,000 empty homes and 90,000 homeless people. So yes, it is going to upset those that have profited and done well off the way the tax system is designed. Enger-Packer said New Zealanders could accept a radical rebalance, because the problems caused by poverty were so big. We have unprecedented poverty, there is no other option if we're going to focus on having a peaceful, living with dignity, nation. We have to deal with the biggest issue we have as a nation at the moment. Cutting GST on fruit and veggies won't help most in need, tax expert. AUT senior taxation lecturer Ranjana Gupta said GST had been removed from food in Australia, but health problems it aimed to reduce remained. Removing GST is not working. Research had shown that demand for fruit and vegetables did not change much, regardless of costs, Gupta said. And because higher income households spend more on food, they would have more GST cut from their spend and reap more benefit from the policy more than low-income households. Programs in other countries showed that targeted payment cards that could only be used only for fruit and vegetables, and healthy eating education would do more to help lower-income households than removing the GST. There were also complexities in introducing and operating a targeted GST reduction, including sorting out which groceries it applied for, and that complexity meant more costs elsewhere. It will reduce efficiency of the tax system, increase the compliance cost for taxpayers, because the resources will be diverted away from businesses used to dealing with the tax system. And more complexity could lead to opportunities for fraud, Gupta said.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.
Does Trudeau's cabinet shuffle really change anything? A little over an hour before members of the new cabinet began strolling up the tree-lined driveway to Rideau Hall, Abacus Data released new survey results that suggest 81% of Canadians feel it's time for a change in government. Though the polls' results are suboptimal for the Liberals, they don't necessarily portend doom for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. Of those who want change, more than half say they see a good alternative to the Liberals. but 31% say they don't see a better option. Recent elections have shown stronger Liberal support than most polls suggest. So while Canadians might be tiring of a government now approaching its 8th anniversary, they're also not quite clamoring for one of the other parties on offer. Perhaps Wednesday's cabinet shuffle will go some small way towards satisfying voters' desire for change. Still, some important things remain the same. There are now new ministers for defense, health, public safety, justice, agriculture, heritage, immigration, housing, revenue, employment, small business, social development, sport, transport, fisheries, Treasury Board, Veterans Affairs, and Crown Indigenous Relations. There's also an entirely new portfolio: Citizens Services. The new minister, Terry Beach, at least becomes the answer to a future trivia question. What changed? Trudeau has tended in the past to demote rather than banish. This time, he was less willing to offer second chances. Marco Mendicino, who might have expected to get a less prominent portfolio after his rocky time as public safety minister, was instead bounced from cabinet entirely. Between retirements and other exits, more than a half dozen people who were ministers when the week began are ministers no longer. 7 Liberal MPs were elevated to fill the empty chairs around the cabinet table. They are decidedly younger than the group they're replacing. The average age of the departing ministers is roughly 61, while the average age of the incoming ministers is about 47. They are broadly more diverse. Several of them, as luck would have it, also represent ridings where there was a reasonably close race in 2021. Some of the changes within cabinet are particularly notable. Pascal Estiange tags in as the new point person for the government's tussle with the internet giants, a fight that pushed Pablo Rodriguez to his limits. Karina Gould, who oversaw the government's child care legislation, and is herself expecting a child in January, will now be one of the government's most prominent faces and voices in Parliament as House Leader. Mark Miller, who seemed to bring both momentum and stability to Crown Indigenous Relations, takes over at Immigration, one of the pillars of the government's economic agenda. Moving Sean Fraser, the former Immigration Minister, to Housing gives the government a better communicator, in the parlance of official Ottawa, to fight the battle over housing affordability. Moving Jean-Yves Duclos to Public Services and Anita Anand to Treasury Board seems at first glance to risk sidelining 2 of the more credible figures in the Trudeau government, but a government source suggested on Wednesday that there is a plan to deploy them as key economic ministers. That same source said the shuffle's primary aim was to put the government's strongest performers on files that need attention, particularly economic files. What didn't? But for all that changed, much stayed the same. Chrystia Freeland remains as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, despite months of wild rumors about her possible departure. François-Philippe Champagne, the fast-talking deal-maker, remains Minister of Innovation. Stephen Guilbeault, the celebrated activist who is sometimes a lightning rod for recalcitrant premiers, is still the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Jonathan Wilkinson, the yin to Guilbeault's yang, is still the Minister of Natural Resources, though he now also has energy in his official title. Keeping those 4 ministers in place suggests a government that doesn't think it needs to change a whole lot about itself or its basic agenda. The relative wisdom of that judgment might not be clear until the ballots from the next election are counted. When Trudeau was asked Wednesday whether he hoped to see out the full life of the government's confidence and supply agreement with the NDP, which isn't set to formally expire until June 2025, he said only that the government has so much work to do over the coming years. That, at least, is beyond dispute both practically and politically. Where do the Liberals go from here? When they haven't been struggling to assert control of the foreign interference controversy or fend off attacks about inflation and the cost of living, the government has been more or less proceeding with an agenda broadly focused on stronger social supports, increased immigration, stringent new climate regulations and government support for the transition to a net zero economy. It's hard to imagine it completely changing that approach. Maybe this government simply needs to do a better job of communicating what it already has done. but significant pieces of that agenda, particularly on climate and energy, have yet to be put in place. And Trudeau still seems to be lacking a decent answer to the unreasonable cost of housing. Even Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's argument on housing, particularly the idea that local gatekeepers are making it unreasonably hard to build more houses, implicitly acknowledges that the basic problem is municipal, not federal. But that's not an argument that federal voters can be expected to accept in 2025. So a lot might be riding on Fraser and his ability to point to things the government has actually done to make the housing market better. This government needs more ribbon cuttings. The Liberals can't offer voters a completely different government. Aside from some new faces, they don't seem particularly interested in offering dramatic change anyway. So their re-election hopes may rest on being able to make the case that the country and Canadians' lives are changing for the better, or at least that the change offered by the other parties would be worse. Either way, there is a lot of work to do, regardless of who is officially responsible for doing it.
Subscribe our YouTube channel and click our bell icon for new videos.